Welcome everyone. I'm Jini Maxwell, and it's my great pleasure to invite you to Writing for Orchestra, What to Prepare, a panel where we're going to break down the kind of practical steps that will help you prepare materials for working with an orchestra, perhaps for the first time. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay my respect to their elders, past and present. With that said, today we have the great honour of hearing from Nicolette Fraillon, Music Director and Chief Conductor of the Australian Ballet, as well as Artistic Director of Orchestra Victoria. Too many job titles, Nicolette. I was telling you. All credit to you. It's truly incredible CV, just in one sentence. Composer Jessica Wells and two musicians from Orchestra Victoria, OVs Associate Principal Trumpet Timothy Francis and Principal Choral Players Dafydd Camp. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
So Orchestra Victoria in particular, I imagine, work with a pretty wide range of composers. Actually, Jessica, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to kind of your experience, maybe working with an orchestra those first few times and your earliest kind of experiences as a composer.
Well, that's a very interesting question, actually, because I think I always wanted to work with orchestras, and I think it started when I was 5 and I did ballet. So ballet was where it got into me. And I was the only kid that could dance in 7/8. So they put me at the front, so. And also I remember being 6 years old and doing the Snow Queen in Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up. And they put me at the front of the line of kids to go on stage because I could hear where to come in the orchestra. So I think orchestra music has just been in my head since really little. And then there were things like me listening to the Ghostbusters soundtrack on my Walkman when I was 9, and listening to, the amazing underscores by Elmer Bernstein, and theremins. Well, actually, it was an ondes martineau, not a theremin. I didn't even know what the instrument was, and cello solos, and all these crazy kind of combinations of 80s pop music as well. And it was just all in my head. So that kind of led me into really desperate to write for orchestra. My first experiences were at uni, so that was at the Conservatorium of Music. I didn't get a chance in high school. In my school we didn't really have an orchestra. Actually, we kind of tried to have an orchestra. I played the tenor saxophone for about 3 months, taught myself, was really bad at it in an orchestra, but I'm a piano player, so I didn't get a chance to sit in with orchestras. So my first experience was at uni, and it was really scary, absolutely scary. But from then, I think everything I've really learned has been from great mentors, teachers, but also just doing it and learning from your mistakes and learning by turning up and having wrongly transposed parts. And everyone's like, oh, that sounds very interesting harmonically. And I'm like, yeah, I think something went wrong, but I'm not going to say anything. So you learn on the go. And I've just built up my kind of knowledge, an arsenal of tricks from over the years. But yeah, it is a bit scary standing out in front of all these musicians in that space, and having everybody, focusing in on you and whether you've got it right. So, but I encourage everyone to give it a go, because now we have technology and you can try stuff out in the digital space. And then that is a much easier way to try things out before you go in front of the orchestra. In my day, I had to handwrite it all and then put it in front of the orchestra and hope it worked. So these days it's a lot easier.
Speaking of kind of the increased access that the digital space kind of provides us, how does one go about, even before one's considering writing for orchestra, how do you meet an orchestra? How does that relationship, or how can that relationship kind of begin? That's just one for the group.
Gee, I think it's tough, and it can be a bit daunting, and going, okay, I really want to do this, where do I start? Unless you're already an orchestral player and have contacts and things. But even then, there can be people a bit shy or reluctant just to talk to their colleagues about what they're doing. Don't be shy. There are multiple pathways, and there's no one is right or best. In our case at the moment with Orchestra Victoria, we're partnering with the APRA AMCOS on high school and going to be running workshops. So it's a great vehicle to go to a representative organisation and ask, how do I do this? Do you have contacts? Sign up for a program that's existing. Because if you attend one, even as an auditor, you'll meet people, you talk to them, and that will lead to another one. I think also courage, just have the courage to send in, and it's really good advice to have really good material prepared that tells, it's succinct because no one has time to read 20 pages, but send to an orchestra like ours or multiple orchestras. This is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I'm interested in. If you're starting out, say it. Say, I'm really looking for a vehicle for some, and from advice, just to seek advice from people, or I have a whole lot of material, and have a really good kind of demo, whatever format you choose, something that's simple, short, gives you the best possible, give me, if you're sending it to me as artistic director of an orchestra, the best possible overview of the kind of things that you write. No one writes one kind of music, so short bursts, a whole variety of things that you can do. Send it off. Send it in some way that will catch our eye, so it's not just boring black and white TV, but something that makes me go pick it up out of the pile and go, oh, this person looks interesting, and create. So it's really having courage. Talk to as many people you can. Someone you speak to will say, oh, look, I have contacts here. How about I introduce you to so and so, and follow that up. It's some legwork, but well worthwhile.
What do you think is the kind of thing that can make that sort of initial contact maybe stand out a little bit, as you said, to set it apart from the kind of black and white CVs?
Well, there are two things when we're, AD or conductor, when you're really, really busy, and with both my roles at TAB and at Orchestra Victoria, I get sent stuff from composers all the time. Something that's, just a little bit different, a little bit colourful, that is really succinct. That says, this is who I am, this is what I need, rather than, oh, here's that. So I know that straight away. So if you're looking for an opportunity just to talk to people in orchestras and ask for advice, say that. Whatever it is that you are wanting upfront, and then something that's a little bit creative, something that's a bit colourful, good English, but it can be short, sharp sentences, but something that just catches the eye, and material that is really easy to access. So not something that was going to take me 10-15 minutes in formats that that are a little bit awkward, or something really simple formats. Do your legwork so that when we get it, we can just go, oh, I wonder what that is. And in 3 minutes between rehearsals or something, I can open up, have a look. Oh, that's really interesting. And a cross-section work, as I said. I don't want half an hour long pieces and then I have to skip forward or anything. Just go introduce it, say this is a 3-minute grab of this, this is a 4-minute grab, this is what I wrote it for. And I would say one thing, Jini, if you have contacts, if there's someone you think, do some homework and go, I wonder if maybe Nicolette or whoever you're sending it to would know this person, and they can recommend it as well. Because first thing I'll go, they're mentioning Jess. Jess seems to know the word. Jess, you know this person. So I can follow up. If you have contacts, name them.
Excellent advice. I think it kind of applies across all these creative fields. You can really just email anyone you like. It would shock you how many people you can just email. I think something people sometimes forget. So imagine you have started contact with kind of maybe an incredible electronic musician who has this great grand idea. They haven't really worked with live musicians very much before. What do they need to prepare to kind of enter that space in the most productive, harmonious way possible?
I could probably answer this a little bit because I work as an orchestrator a lot for many composers who are already formidable orchestrators themselves or have not got that experience but work electronically. And what I can say is that a lot of them have just a really good sense of what works, in the spread of tracks that they'll have in their DAW. And I can see what they're trying to achieve, which is great. But there are a lot of pitfalls with what will sound like your sample in the room. And often it won't translate and there's many factors of that. It's the size of the orchestra you've got. it's the space that you're in, the acoustic. For example, I get quite a lot of composers writing big, fat pizzicato sounds and then writing arco strings on top of that. And I'm like, well, if we're going to get this big, fat pizzicato sound, I need 70 strings in a room and I need to record them closely to get that sound. Whereas in a live situation, I can't actually combine that together very well. I can put the pizzicatos in, but they won't be sounding that big and large. So, and I've done that before. And as an orchestrator, I can then recommend things like, let's put some put the pizzicatos into staccato woodwinds, for example. We can translate things across the orchestra to get a similar effect and move things around a little bit. So working with someone who does know about how to write for orchestra would be helpful. And, you know, getting a little bit of help. So many YouTube clips you can watch now. I never had YouTube. I had to go to the library and look up videos or listen to CDs. And so now you've got YouTube clips of orchestras playing where they zoom in and you can see people playing things, and you can look at scores that are scrolling past. So you can learn a lot if you don't know about orchestra by really doing some research and into, you know, what's out there. There's so much out there. It's quite amazing. But yeah, I think it's if you've got a good idea of what to do, just go for it. Obviously, you know, if you've got simpler ideas that will translate, you know, into orchestra better than sort of cramming too much in, I think that's always a good way to start. Yeah, get some help and do some research.
Yeah, I would also second that. I think it's, to be successful, even just starting out, to have the most successful experience, it's all in your preparation. And I think it is an electronic world which opens up all kinds of possibilities that are very exciting. But as Jess mentioned, you know, the electronic samples in no way represent what happens acoustically or what actually even happens technically with a player. So you can read. Just start reading now about the instruments, things in the orchestra, what a trumpet range is, where it sounds good, where it doesn't sound good, and I'll throw to Tim and Daph for a little bit more specific as instrumentalists. But as a conductor, do your prep so that you're getting the basics right. Seek advice. As I said, if you really have no idea, again, come to an orchestra if you don't have other, you know, acoustic instrument playing friends, orchestral instrument playing friends. Just come and say, hey, I'd really like to speak to the oboe player. I'd really like to speak to the string players just to get some advice on what works and what doesn't work. And I haven't come across a musician yet who will say no to that, not ever. And musicians would much prefer to be doing that. Spend an hour, you know, go have a cup of coffee, talk to them about what you're in, and then ask specific questions, or listen and then go away and think and come back with specific questions. Because the more prep you do, the more we go, they're really interested, they really care about, and then you will save so much time when you actually get to the session with orchestra. Orchestras work in calls. There's a limited amount of time. You'll have limited amount of access. So your success in your first, whether it's a workshop or a recording session or something, is all about doing it in advance. And we might come back to that, Jini, because I'll talk about that, what I would like to see as a conductor, but maybe Daph and Tim can talk a bit about what they would like as instrumentalists.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think the preparation, I'm sure Daph would agree with me, you know, preparation goes a long way in being able to offer something to the musicians that is, for lack of a better word, playable. You know, you want to be able to, you want to start it from a place of knowing what an instrument can do and can't do. You know, that starts with that preparation, like's been said. You know, listen to, you know, there's a ton of, you know, videos for every instrument, from tutorials to solos to seeing them in the orchestra. You can sort of gauge quite quickly what sounds, or how, for example, in my case, how a trumpet's been used, you know, in the past, and you know, this type of music, and it's going to be very different to how a composer would write for, say, Daph on the carongle and the oboe, right?
Yeah, I mean, just all the three of you talking just reminds me of a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and I've just got that running through my mind. In that, it can seem really daunting, but I mean, as classical musos, we're people as well, and we might seem stuffy and a bit scary, but we actually do want to help you. And as Nicolette said, you know, she doesn't know anyone that would say no to this, and I would have to agree with that. But yes, what is playable is not necessarily what sounds the best, and sometimes this knowledge only comes from like actually really talking to people. Videos, yes. YouTube, I mean, I have students where I'm constantly like, yes, when I was studying, we didn't have YouTube. It's the world is at your fingertips, to really pick up as much information as you can. But yes, really doing your homework. I think it's been said, to really understand what's of course what's doable, but also what sounds good. And I was thinking about this before coming to this panel, and if you're talking to if you're coming from a electronic music background and you don't know acoustic classical musicians, I suppose, ask them what their favorite solos are, or just some really fantastic passages in the repertoire for orchestral music or opera or ballet, or even film music, because that's obviously inspired me and probably a lot of other people.
Me too.
Although for me, I think it was more like Bugs Bunny and those kind of things when I was younger. But ask them what the instrumentalists, some solos that really kind of show off what the instrument's capable of and what sounds good. And I think that's a good pathway to getting into writing something that's sort of really that just sounds great and idiomatic as well for the instrument.
There's actually an audience question here that I think you've just answered very nicely, which is there a downside to digital tools and sample libraries, and any pitfalls translating from digital to part writing for players?
Yes.
Sounds like, yeah.
That's my job.
Yes.
My job, like, I'm working on 4 movies right now, so it's like film scoring season, like rabbit season. It's at the end of the year. It's all pushing towards getting releases, done for Christmas time. And it's just, it gets messier as it gets on, because the composer's working quickly and trying to get approvals and all of that. I'm sure it works the same in the games industry. I haven't worked on many games, but yeah, it's the same kind of idea. And what happens is you get all these tracks which are doubled because they're trying to get the better sound, and I'm not going to do that twice, Then there's quantization. You've got to make sure your notes are quantized, not just the front of the note, but the end of the note as well, because they'll overlap. And if you try and bring that into your notation software, it becomes a big old mess. It looks horrible. So there's all these things that you need to do in your DAW to prepare to get it out of there as a MIDI file into your either Sibelius, Doric, or Finale software. So there's all these things you've got to do in there before you can even get it into a score. And then the notation itself is a big one. So look, you guys saying that to ask musicians for help, I've been doing this for 25 years and I still ask musicians for help, and I still will do screenshots of something and go, will this bowing work? Can you breathe for this long on this trumpet part? Do I need to give you a breath here? Or, I ask questions to people all the time, and I still do it. And because all the music coming in is so different, it's great. The other pitfalls in the DAWs are, let me see, don't transpose anything in the track. Do it in the MIDI, because if you do, it'll just turn up in the MIDI in the wrong key. There's lots of these things that happen. Make sure you set up your tracks in your DAW in orchestral order. So start with the flute, then the oboe, make your way down, do it in orchestral order, so you kind of have a sense of how your notation's going to work on the page. Things like delays and reverbs and things, it's like, obviously that's an after effect. So you've got to kind of think about it as, you know, dry within a room. Or if you're going to separate sections of the orchestra so that you can, you know, play with them in the mix, how you're going to do that, or you're going to have all the orchestra in one room. There's so many variables in there. I mean, I'm happy to answer specific questions if anyone's got any about, you know, specific things in the door. In the notation side of things, it's all about the orchestrator's job is actually not just getting MIDI and cleaning it up and adding articulations, expressions, and dynamics and phrasing. We also have to try and interpret the music so that the players can interpret the notation the way that you want the style. So that's super important. So with strings, for example, spiccato, staccato, you know, loure bowing on the string. There's so many different types of bowing that you can have. And often in a film score, we'll just leave it kind of blank and work it out on the day because the composer might not quite actually know what they want. Or I can go to the composer and say, do you really want staccato here? Or would you rather just kind of like a light spiccato off the string? You know, it's a different style. So we have to actually interpret the samples, which are not always going to give us what the composer intends. So sometimes you just have to kind of listen to orchestral music and think, this is the kind of sound I want, and then give that to the orchestrator, and we'll do the notation the correct way. Or ask the players, how do I make this sound like this, you know, in notation? What do I do to the notation to make that be interpreted correctly? So it's all about interpretation in musicians, and classical musicians are different to jazz musicians, commercial players. So you've got another whole kettle of fish with notation with jazz players, which I've had to do in the same space, in the same film. I've done, you know, Broadway session with big band and then do classical orchestra. You have to do it differently. So there's lots of pitfalls. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a bit scary, but I think just know the kind of style that you want in your music, and then get some help with making sure it's notated the right way so that the musicians will turn up to the session and go bam, and it's done, and they know exactly what you want.
Actually, to that end, I believe you actually brought in some physical examples to kind of show people, which is so excellent.
Well, okay, this is a big A3 score. Hopefully you can see that. I can tell you now, this is from the movie Necrotronic. I don't know if anyone's seen Necrotronic, but it was called Necromancer at the time, but it's called Necrotronic. Australian composer Michael Lira. And if you go to YouTube and look up the APRA Screen Music Awards for 2020, you'll see me conducting a little 20-piece orchestra online in track dance scoring stage with the film on the background. And we're doing 4-minute excerpts of these films for the awards. So you can watch the orchestra and they zoom in on the players. It's really cool. So that's one of the big scores. And I do it, you know, sort of concertina style sticky tape. There's sticky tape on the back, and this is so it doesn't make a noise in the session. Then next to that, this is B4 paper. So this is a B4 part. B4 is kind of a specialist paper for orchestras around Australia. You can fit quite a lot on there, which is great. No less page turns, but you have to get that paper cut to size and ordered. So regular people use A4 paper. So there's the difference in size. And that's cool because I'm working on a movie I'm sending to London right now, and it's all in A4. So every country has their own, you know, sizes that they use. But just having a look at the layout, that's a bass part. Look how nicely neat and tidy that looks. You know, that's the key. Everybody needs to know, you know, where they are. They can navigate themselves across the score. They've got little points of, you know, figuring out where they are on this. So that formatting is super, super duper important, and that will help the musicians navigate across their parts as well. So the other thing is, yes, you've done your orchestral score now, you've got it out of your door, you've made a score out of it, you've got some help, you've notated it, now you've got to do the parts. Don't leave it till the night before. Do not leave it till the night before. If you've haven't done it before, you'll need a few days to do the first batch, and then when you get better at it, you can do it in a few hours. But
yeah, and I think the earlier you do it, so let's, come again, the earlier you finish the score, the sooner you can get it to the conductor. What we do as conductors is also go through and work out what we may see are issues or questions about instrumentation and orchestration. In terms of, just following on from something that Jess said, as the more information you put in, the better result you are going to get in terms of we being able to realise what it is you want. Now, it's fine also to go, I'm not really sure, so in this session, can we work something out? And particularly if you're heading into workshops, that's a good learning experience. But if you have a clear picture in your head of what you want, the more work you do to prep, to go, how do I translate that to the page, seek advice, the quicker and more efficiently we can work in that very short space of time that you'll actually have with the orchestra. So really a lot of prep. The sooner you get the score to the conductor, the sooner we'll come back with questions. I know in film and in the gaming world, often it's happening really, really quickly because of pressure deadlines. But in an ideal world, you want to get the score to the conductor as soon as you can so that we can learn it and talk to you about what it is that you're after and problems. And similarly, the sooner you can get the parts to the players, the sooner they can also come back and go, I'm not really sure what this is, seems to be the wrong clef, is it the right clef? I don't know that this will actually work well on my instrument, and they will feed back. And much better that you get that in advance, and we've been able to address all those questions, because there'll be a shitload more questions that arise in the session itself. So, you want to get everything you possibly can done up front, so that we can maximise the time solving any problems or simply just getting the work down in advance. And as part of this exercise, when you're starting out, I would just say, start really simple. So as part of your learning, best way to learn is, rather than going, I've got this program and I can use this gigantic Scala or John Williams size orchestra. Let's not do that to start with. Start with a string piece. Give yourself an exercise and go, there is so much to learn about what string players can do and sounds they can offer. So just write something for strings, or to write something for strings, add a woodwind, or just make yourself start small, and then listen to the advice, and you'll learn so much through that, rather than going straight away to the gigantic pieces. And what you learn through doing that and scaling up will give you much better results. Ultimately, you really learn how to deal with the miraculous millions worth of sounds that orchestras can make and instrumentalists can make in a multitude of combinations.
I have a question here from Mina Shamali, who asks, what is the most egregious sin to commit as a composer working with an orchestrator or with live musicians in general?
Can I just jump in? Actually, something just listening to Jess and Nicolette talk, something actually pops into my mind. Maybe it's not so egregious, but one thing that can make, as a playing musician, one thing that can make our lives really difficult is if you format your score and the parts, and for example, the trumpet doesn't always play. Sometimes we can have rests. If you format your parts a block of 100 bars of rest without any sort of flag posts, grouping the bars in groups of 10 or something, or 15 or 16 or whatever you want to do, that is one thing that's going to waste a lot of time in the studio. Going, let's go from bar number 120. Where's that? You got to sort of guess and find it within a sea of 200 bars rest. There's a I've encountered that many times, a huge time waster, and it's a simple formatting thing. So I would say that's in terms of time wasting, fairly egregious.
Yeah, and the formatting that goes on then to just basic pragmatic things, just touched on page turns. But if you think of players, so string players normally sit in groups of two, so one of them can stop playing to turn a page while the other one keeps playing. But knowing that if that's at the moment where you want the biggest, richest string sound, that's not where you put your page turn. So thinking about where the page turn goes. But instrumentalists like Dafydd, so in oboe or Tim trumpet, or where they're solo, they have to play and turn the page. So if you've got in the middle of a big trumpet solo a page turn, he's not going to be able to keep it. So really And it sounds really, but they're kind of the worst things where you go, oh, really, that's kind of orchestral writing 101. So really, again, go to Jess, seek advice from orchestrators, from people who know that kind of basic thing, because that's the worst. It makes everyone sit there and go, they haven't bothered to think about it at all.
I have to agree. I have to agree with the page turns, and sometimes we, as musicians, we even have to do that for scores which have been around for 200 years, and that's annoying because we have to go and photocopy it and then sticky tape it, and then suddenly just remembering back to an opera where I'm literally turning the page with my oboe. Not ideal.
Resourceful though.
It's a talent, but it's not ideal because you don't want to take out the stand or anything. But it's such a simple thing, and I can't imagine as a composer, you know, having so much to think about with orchestrating all the instruments and making sure everything's there and stuff like that. But it's just like, again, I think what Nicolette was alluding to, it builds a sort of a better relationship, and it means that you'll hear more of your music because there won't be huge pages shuffling and perhaps some grumbling.
And just think, put yourself. I would put yourself in our shoes, the people who are having to play or read it, and just show the examples of sort of page sizes and things. We as an orchestra prefer B4 to read from. A3 doesn't fit on stands, and it's all right on a conductor stand, but it doesn't fit on traditional music stands where you've often got sconce lights. So B4 will fit under a sconce light, which is, you know, a light that goes so that we can actually read the music better. We don't only use those in pits. Often recording studios and things are not well lit. Musicians can read and are amazing at sight reading and things, but the better the music and the simpler it's laid out, the more legible it is, the better they can actually play what it is. Now, it sounds logical, but the number of times we get parts where the musical staves are so close together that a dynamic marking at the bottom of the stave is kind of jammed on top of the highest note of the next stave. So you have to go, I don't even know what that is. And every time we have to double take or read, you're losing time, or they're not able to play. So that's a really good example, Jess, of what looks good on a page. But similarly, we've had also where someone's gone, oh, I'll make it really large and I've got 2 or 3 staves to a page, and, you know, I'm not a 3-year-old, I don't want to like that. And then I have to turn a page 25 times more than I would otherwise have to do. So, you know, even if you don't know, go, what looks sensible? And if you really don't know, because you don't score in, that's fine too. Take it to someone, find someone and go, what do you think? Is that legible or not?
I'll give you a professional tip. So most scores are, most of your software, Finale, Sibelius, etc., will have a staff size of 7 millimeters, and that's at whatever size it comes out on the page. I do 6.5. I think 7 looks slightly remedial, and you can fit just that little bit much more on if you're at 6.5 millimeters. And a lot of orchestras will send out sheets of, you know, you can get that. Contact the orchestra and ask them for their cheat sheet of how to put your parts together. They've got all that for you. But they say 7 mil, I say 6.5. So, and I've been doing this for 25 years. You could just fit that bit much more on. Here's another professional tip for your recording session. A lot of the time your strings are playing full on and your trumpet's sitting there playing the last note. So yes, absolutely, we need rehearsal letters to break it all up, or double bar lines at least will help break it up. And with your strings, if they're continuously playing and need a page turn, what we'll do is we'll stop at a point where we can stop and do a pickup. Make sure all your strings turn at the same time on that pickup point. So if it happens to be letter E, figure E on your score, make sure your strings will turn on that page. Then you don't get some of them turning at different times. Just make it so they all turn on page 3. So there's some little tips like that I've picked up over the years that really, really help and just make things go smoothly. Because what you don't want is to be embarrassed when things go a bit sideways in your recording session, the music's great, the music's working, but it's those silly little things that just weigh it down, you know, that's where you can get a little bit embarrassed. And look, I've had it happen. I had a trumpet player hold up a score and go, my page turns are all on the wrong side, because, you know, somebody put a title page on the front and that whacked out all my page turns, right? So everything was backwards and I had to go photocopy the whole thing and run off and bring it back because all the pages were in the wrong spot. So it happens to the best of us, but you learn from that. You certainly don't want to be all stressed out during your session. You want it to go smoothly. And
just following along from the bar line conversation, I think what Tim was saying initially, yes, 4 or 8 or 16. I played a performance of a piece once. It's not newly composed, but it was grouped in bars of 5, and that was very lopsided and hard to follow. And you might think 5, 10, okay, that's how we normally count, but I mean, it was incredibly hard to count. I kept losing my place.
We have quite a few questions in the chat, which is excellent to see. So I might try to find another one from there. But actually, first I wanted to say, I think I've had a good one. First, I wanted to say kind of the consistent message I feel like I'm getting from this panel is the most important skill for writing for orchestra is just having a bit of grace and kind of maintaining strong communication, not being too egotistical, accepting you'll make mistakes and doing your best to remedy them or foresee them.
You'll make mistakes. Everybody does. And that's fine. And most orchestral musicians are very graceful about allowing new people who've never done it before to make those mistakes. They're not going to jump down your throat. You know, times have changed a little bit. You know, we don't have conductors that are, you know, using fear as a kind of a way of getting what they want, right, Nicolette? So there, you know, there's a lot of room for that, and it's fine. And it's all about the learning. You know, we have to fail to then learn. We've got to remember that. It's about the journey. It's not just about being perfect the first time, you know. But if you use your nous, you'll do a better job.
And I think, Jini, part of that is, and I come back to it, is do your prep and seek your advice early, because for the musicians, when we're actually in that recording session, it's Tim's reputation on the line. If he sounds bad on the recording, and if you're the cause of that because of what you've written or the material is bad, that makes you unpopular. So we all want to get the best possible result, but it's their necks on the line in that recording session, or it's the orchestra's reputation if then the presenter comes back that we're not using them again because they just didn't get it together. So there's a whole lot of sort of professional stuff on the line when you're in a recording session. But like I said, if you do the prep in advance, everybody will give you the time and be really generous and say, no, actually, let's help. If you say, is this a sensible place for a page turn? Does this work? We would much prefer those questions. Everyone will spend that time with you so that we can all do the best possible result for you, whoever we're being employed by, in the recording session.
So we have a few questions about budgets, which I think makes sense, kind of as something to raise in the early creative stage and figure out early. What are, for example, for a kind of independent, maybe artistic game development team who want to work with classical musicians but maybe don't have the budget for kind of full orchestra, what sort of options are available to them?
I can answer this if you like. I do a lot of hybrid stuff, and that's very typical of Australian production because we just don't often have the budget to do the full orchestra sound. And even in Hollywood films, I'll tell you right now, a lot of the percussion, pianos, harps, celestes, and other auxiliary sounds are samples. So the first thing you do is sorry, percussion. sorry, percussion. There are percussionists on this panel. A lot of that will be taken out and done as samples. And and then you just choose the things that you want to have in. Like, for example, if you've got a big action piece of music for your game and you want lots of drumming, get two percussionists in on a whole set of cool drums and record them separately and get that drumming in there and get some improvising happening, because percussionists are awesome at improvising on top of what you've written, and use that skill and get that separately, use that sort of to your advantage. Then if you've, say, got all your samples nicely put in your DAW, you can layer some strings over the top of that to give it that more human element, and sort of then you have to cleverly kind of mix them. If you've got a small string section in a room, you can't really double them too many times. It just starts to get out of, get phasing problems. It's just not going to sound very good. So you kind of just need to book, a good number of players, maybe 10 strings or something if you can. If you want a more orchestral sort of sound, you've got to use at least sort of 10 strings, 12 strings. You could do a more intimate sound with like a string quartet. That's something else you could try. Like, you kind of have to match it with what you've got. But yes, you can have an orchestral sample piece and add some solo trumpet on top, add a solo cello to it. You can do it in small ways to enhance your music for the first starting point. And as you get better and better at it, you can start adding more instruments in and work your way up to an orchestra. That's a good way of doing it. But yeah, I'm telling you now, Hollywood productions, they are using hybrids of samples and orchestra combined together to get the sound that they want. And it's just it's a time constraint and a budget constraint thing a lot of the time.
Sure. I have another question here from Doug, who asks, for smaller groups, should I contact the full orchestra initially or contact individual musicians to kind of create a group from scratch? Maybe Daph and Timothy, you can take that one.
Yeah, I think I mean, when we study performing and study music, we work with a lot of people from all over the orchestra and a lot of different musos, and we sort of, it's part of our job that we have to work with other people very quickly and build that relationship. So I would say that there's no it's not, I don't think it's like a rock band or something, or a pop group where you have to like find your sounds or something. Like, we're sort of used to working with each other and communicating and going, can we do this, can we do that? And as orchestral musos, we have to be flexible as well. So we're used to just combining and collaborating on very short notice. Yeah, I'm not sure from approaching an orchestra point of view, but I think I was just thinking about I think following along, maybe in thinking about budgetary things. I was thinking about Wagner operas, and that they have a huge orchestra, but the orchestra is not always playing all the time, and it's often very chamber sounds, like 3 or 4 instruments maybe, and that doesn't so it doesn't make it any worse that you're having less musos or something. But yeah, a chamber group, and by chamber music, 2 to 8 people or something is a really good way to start. And I think just probably if you can manage to try and work out 5, 6, 7, 8 people's schedules and combine it and make your own group, I think that's a good place to start.
And there's, Jini, just a couple of pragmatic things. If you don't, Doug, or everyone, if you don't have any contacts at all, contacting an orchestra is a good place to start, to say, I don't want a whole orchestra, but can you put me in touch with? We get those requests all the time for a whole lot of things. Do you have a string quartet, brass group, whatever? And look up what groups in your city, in your state, regularly work with and commissioning of new music or playing new music. They're more readily likely to want to give you advice and work with you. So there's any number of contemporary music ensembles and other ensembles. If you want a string quartet, go to the Australian String Quartet or any of the existing ones. You can see them and go, hey, this is what I'm after, could I work with you? Because there are plenty of mixed ensembles of all kinds, chamber ensembles, that you can also go to. And if they can't help you, they'll certainly be able to advise you where else to go. So if it's too daunting to put a group together, look up all the existing groups and then just contact, and they will move you in the right direction.
Yes, again, it's just all about communication from the sounds of things, which is great. It's a great point to kind of return to. Hugh Wagner asks, what facilities or groups are there set up for recording orchestra in Australia? Maybe more relevant to panel number 2, but I'd love to get your perspective as well.
There's lots, you know, some of the obviously state orchestras do recording. So I've done 2 Nigel Westlake scores, one with Melbourne Symphony, which was Paper Planes, and we also did Ali's Wedding with the Sydney Symphony, and we're about to do another one with the Melbourne Symphony. So, you know, they will do film scores. Very hard to get the big ones, big orchestras, because they're very busy and fitting in the schedule, etc. But in Sydney, we have the Sydney Scoring Orchestra, which is managed by Alex Henry of Click Track Enterprises. So say we need, you know, 50 strings for 4 sessions, and we need a big 17-piece brass session for 3 sessions. Then we did a woodwind session of 8 woodwinds, and then we need a choir of 32 voices. You know, they will put all that together. With choirs, there's you know, various different choirs, Sydney Philharmonia, Cantillation, you know, you can grab singers. The main thing they want to sort of see is, what is your instrumentation? Do you need 3 alto flutes, or, you know, what do you require, so that they can book the players in? I know I've had to run around saying I can't get 3 alto flutes, you know, contrabass, clarinet, blah, blah, blah. And with the singers, if you're recording choirs, they often want to sort of hear a bit of the music so they can see what kind of quality singers you want. Recently, we recorded Maya and the Three for Tim Davies in Sydney, and we had a fantastic choir come in, and they had to sing all kinds of different styles, like pretend they're children's choirs, or you know, have different sounds. So they're quite flexible, these session musicians who can play all kinds of different music. When we did Lego Batman, we had an electric guitar off in the other room shredding, you know, to do all the Joker's themes. So you just get in who you need, and that can usually be booked by one person. The orchestral contractor, whoever you're using to do the booking, will get the players that you request. And you want that jazz big band, well then, yeah, you've got to contact the right people to get the jazz players in. So yeah, there's networks of that, people that can book the players for you. So you can certainly get out there and find those contractors to help you out.
In terms of actual facilities, Jini, it varies from city to city. There are very few places in each of the major Australian cities where you can actually record a full orchestra all in one go. That's quite limited. But places like Trackdown also specialise. You can do that there, but also a lot of games in particular, you don't have everyone all in together. So it'll be recording the strings, it'll be recording the brass and the percussion and everything separately. So you don't need such big facilities. So there are more options for recording in that way. You still need the actual technical capacities to be able to multi-track and record in that way, but there are more options. And at the other end, if you are mixing electronics and you just want 1 or 2 other instruments, then even your sort of garage recording studio where someone will record a local, you know, your own band at home, or you've got a mate who does it, you can record single instruments there for yourself to mix. If you're really going, I haven't got that kind of budget, then be creative. There are all kinds of ways of doing what you might need to do with a few acoustic instrumentalists rather than a whole ensemble. But the simple answer is, for large orchestra, there's very few options in each of the cities. So then you end up in Melbourne in either Hampton or Iwaki, perhaps down at Sound Studio. Sydney also very limited options. But you can be far more creative and just recording small groups.
We have a few questions returning to the kind of physical materials themselves. The first being Sam Dixon, who asks, are there formatting resources or example scores that they can find kind of at home for reference?
It's very hard to get your hands on film scores because they're owned by the film companies and they don't publish them. But I think you can get, like Hal Leonard does publish things like John Williams scores or suites of music from films that are now, because everyone's doing the whole Harry Potter live, all these kind of amazing film concerts where they put the film on screen and they're using the original film cues, so they are set up that way. So you can probably get your hands on some of those online through big publishers like Hal Leonard, with the suites of orchestral music that's from film. But it is very difficult to get your hands on this stuff because, we shred it after most of the time. It's terrible how much paper we go through. And also because a lot of time in film scores, what we record gets changed, on the day and chopped and messed up. So the paper and formatting that we do for the sessions isn't relevant then later on. So suites are probably where you could, have an orchestral suite of music from a film. That's probably closer to what you'll be able to get online. But yeah, look, I'm actually the vice president of the Music Arrangers Guild of Australia, MAGA, not the American Trump thing. We have nothing to do with them. We've been around for 60 years, a lot longer than Trump. He tried to steal our acronym. And we represent orchestrators, arrangers, and copyists. And so we have, 200 members. If you guys are interested in getting some mentoring, we have some certificate memberships for students or people starting out where we can pair you up with a mentor who can look over your work and give you some tips. So please check us out. It's a really amazing resource because we have lots of arrangers who are retired now who would love to give back, to the younger generation learning. So please look at our website. It's magainc.org.au. And we have these memberships available for students and hopefully to then join us later as full members. And we can definitely give you advice on that kind of thing.
There's actually a question I think that follows on from that one quite nicely. Tanya Owens asks, if I wanted to get into orchestration, how would I go about it?
They're teaching it a bit more at university these days, but it's not something that I particularly learned at university myself. I'm a composer, I learned composing, but it's one of those things where you kind of just learn. There's so many resources online. There's orchestration tips on Facebook. I mean, there's people posting on there all the time about how does this work? If I put this clarinet with that trumpet, will that work? Or, you can ask questions to a general public of orchestrators who can answer your questions. It's pretty amazing on there. And someone mentioned Thomas Goss, who's got an incredible set of resources online as well. So yeah, you can get into it in that way. And yeah, the asking people for help, and can you have a look over my score? I mean, I do that. I teach a little bit, and at university I'm pretty full up, so I can't really take in any more students at the moment, unfortunately. But the Music Arrangers Guild, obviously, you could go to them and ask, I need someone to give me some sessions on, on looking at my scores. They can help set you up for that, for sure. But yeah, universities offer various courses, but it's hard to kind of get just an orchestration course. It's a tricky one. Maybe I should start organizing some more of those kind of webinars or something in that area.
Yeah, but I mean, the composition courses also do offer it. So often as part of teaching of composition, you're learning how to orchestrate. And there are basic books. I mean, it's something that has been discussed and written about for centuries. So going back to Rimsky-Korsakov and Principles of Orchestration, and there are books that just even give you some basic ideas, really worth looking at, as well as Jess said, countless resources online. But there's lots. If you just look up instrumentation or orchestration, and that you'll come up with a wealth of things, and it's worth. You can do a quick scan to go, actually, I know that stuff, no, but I need something more advanced, or actually that's really interesting, just as a starting point.
Kira asks, sort of going back to the actual kind of physical materials, paper seems so problematic. Is there no viable digital solution for this?
That's life. Like, you know, this is like 120 GSM, you know, it's nice thick paper. And unfortunately, a lot of it, you know, we only use a few times. But look, a lot of smaller chamber groups are now using iPads, and it's fab. You know, so I did the Screen Music Awards last year and printed everything out for my players, but a few of them showed up with iPads because I'd sent the PDFs. They already had the iPad, they'd done all their markups digitally on the iPad, and it was all great, and they used them. So I'm hoping there'll be a more proliferation of musicians using iPads. I think they're fantastic with the pedal, you know, to change the page. But unfortunately in film scores, we are still printing mammoth amounts of paper, and there's sort of no way around it as of yet. But for smaller groups, yes, the iPad is fab. And the tip that I can give you for that is that, you know, on a normal sort of printed page, you've got a bit of margin space around the, you know, the edge. Well, you don't need that on the iPad. You can kind of just stretch your music right out to the edge, and that way you can get a bigger looking score on the iPad. So if you're formatting for iPad, just make it bigger so that goes on the screen. But yes, I've done a bit of that, and some musicals also are using iPads, and yeah, it's terrific. It's the way of the future, I'm hoping.
Couple more just very practical questions. Annie asks, can you recommend any good printers in Melbourne for scores and parts?
Nicolette.
I don't know, because we, as orchestras, we tend to have our own music libraries, and the Australian Ballet we do as well. So we prepare all the parts, and depending on who we're working with, we'll, you know, speak to someone like Jess and discuss whether we get parts from her or whether we just do that ourselves. We have music librarians who are okay with most of the music software and can also assist with the preparation parts and the resolution of any issues, page turns or anything else. So the larger ensembles and organisations have their own music librarians and printing facilities, capacities. If you're working with us, then we'll do it for you. And in fact, it's often even preferable, because then we get material that we know in discussion with you will do what you need, but also what we need.
There are quite a few questions here that I think are going to relate more to the kind of recording side rather than the writing side. So I might, I've been desperately copying them over so I can save them for next session. But I think that has just been like, this has been such a rich discussion. I feel like we've covered a huge amount of ground and a lot of paper. So I think maybe we might leave it there unless there's kind of any final points that any of you wanted to raise.
I just wanted to say, don't be afraid to get in touch. You know, email the orchestras. If you know anyone that knows a musician, ask them. We are always really so happy to help, so happy to give advice, look through parts, even play stuff for you, really. Like, and the more you sort of engage with the people that you'll eventually hear playing your music, the more closer to the result you have in your heads will sort of come to fruition, I think.
Fantastic. Anyone else, or shall we leave it there?
I think that was fantastic.
Yeah,
so,
I think
yeah.
that was brilliant. Thank you so
Well
much,
said.
everyone. I think you gave a lot of incredibly useful guidance. I'm sure that the audience will agree. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Jini.
Thanks, Jini.
Thanks, Jini. Bye.